This is the Blood Red podcast from the Liverpool Echo.
They have to think that they can reach the expectations of all the other people, of all the fans, of all the press or whatever. So if somebody wants to help LFC, you have to change from doubter to believer.
5 years of Jurgen Klopp, Champions League success, Premier League success, the building of a modern classic. This is the Blood Red podcast, courtesy of the Liverpool Echo, as we look back on Klopp's 5-year reign to date, from also-rans to uncatchables. We'll look back on the memorable matches, the achievements, the signings, and so much more. Besides, I'm Guy Clarke. Alongside me to reminisce and maybe even worship our three wise men, Paul Gorst, Joe Rimmer and Sean Bradbury. How are we, gentlemen?
Not bad, Guy, yeah. Looking forward to getting stuck into this one. Can't believe it's been 5 years since the normal one from Black Forest walked into Anfield and got cracking to flown over.
Sean, what have you made of the 5 years?
It's a strange one. Like, you know, in some respects, it feels like it's gone in a flash, and you know, he's turned the club around from, they say, also rans club that weren't really kind of winning anything into being absolutely at the top of the pops. But then, yeah, in some respects, it feels like it's taken a little while to put his team together and all that. So yeah, it's going to be good fun digging into it. Yeah,
and there has been some journey along the way, hasn't it, Joe?
It has, yeah, it has. It does feel like yesterday when he walked through the doors of Anfield and held that first press conference. But like Sean says, in one sense, yeah, it does feel like yesterday when he did that. But then it does seem to have been a little bit of a slow process. But here we are, Premier League champions, world champions, and not long ago European champions. So it's not done a bad job.
No, he certainly hasn't done a bad job. As I said, we'll look back through sort of the moments, the matches and the signings as well. But Gorsty, before we get into even Jurgen Klopp's reign, obviously before he came in, Brendan Rodgers had to go after that draw with Everton. It'd obviously been a close run thing in 2014, the year after things went quite stale and therefore then badly wrong. But when Liverpool were getting Jurgen Klopp in, what was your sort of emotion you're feeling at the time with this guy who'd won 2 Bundesligas coming in to Anfield?
I think at the time I thought Liverpool were probably lucky to be getting him because he was, even back then, 5 years ago, he was kind of renowned as one of the most progressive, forward-thinking coaches in Europe, wasn't he? Was probably one of the most, he was still in his 40s at the time, you know, a bright young coach with certain ideas that were proven to be successful with Dortmund. They obviously broke the Bayern Munich stranglehold in the Bundesliga and won back-to-back Bundesliga titles there, and then kind of came to European prominence a little bit later on when that run to the Champions League final, when they were beaten by Bayern, and kept seeing his top players poached by Bayern, wasn't he? And time and again, he kept coming back, and he just kind of grew his reputation from there. So at the time, Liverpool were 10th in the Premier League. The whole kind of structure of the club was a bit of a mess, really, with Brendan Rodgers and the infamous transfer committee never really seeing eye to eye on players, and the recruitment was so skewed that it had Liverpool in a bit of a mess, particularly from the season before when it ended on that note, that 6-1 defeat to Stoke, didn't it? And it kind of just felt that Rodgers' run had come to the end that summer. So the fact that Liverpool kind of backed him to the tune of 80 million, and then 6 weeks later they were getting rid of him, they really were in disarray. So they were very lucky to attract a manager of Klopp's calibre, and I think the fans always knew it was going to take time. Liverpool fans aren't soft, are they? They knew it weren't going to be an overnight success. They got behind them, and then slowly but surely there was certainly cause for optimism, which included runs to the Europa League final and the League Cup final that season.
Yeah, Joe, I suppose one of the comforting things maybe about Jurgen Klopp coming in was at the time he was sort of the hipster shout, the guy who had gegenpressing. No one really knew what that was, but more than anything, he had a vision and he had a track record of staying places for a while and implementing a vision, which Liverpool at the time, as Gorsty alludes to, were quite clearly lacking.
Well, that was it. You know, I think Brendan Rodgers did have a vision when he was at Liverpool, but it was funny how in that final sort of 10 months of his reign, Rodgers' vision sort of fell apart. And, you know, even that summer, you look at some of his signings and Benteke didn't really seem to fit in with the style of football that Liverpool had played in the past. And I think Liverpool just needed a reset, and they needed someone to come in and have a strong idea and a strong philosophy, and Klopp had that. And I also think they needed someone with the track record of winning trophies. And I think one thing that always was difficult for Rodgers is every time he had a bit of a bad patch, people would remind him of the fact that he hadn't won trophies, that Liverpool was the first big club that he was at. Whereas Klopp, I remember at the time, when Rodgers went, and the two main contenders for the job were Klopp and Ancelotti was the other one mentioned. So Liverpool felt like they were going to get one of two managers who had world-renowned success. So, Klopp immediately came in, and you could just feel the lift in the whole place. You could feel the excitement among fans. And I think Klopp was the type of manager who a lot of fans had kept an eye on from afar. His attitude and his refreshing style had been something that lots and lots of fans admired of every club. So Liverpool were the envy of many, many clubs when they got Klopp, and it's just been a match made in heaven, hasn't it? So, I just think he had the full package of what Liverpool needed in a manager, and so it's turned out because he's been brilliant.
Yeah, and of course, over 5 years, Sean, he's had question marks over him and if he would ultimately be able to implement what he has now done at Liverpool. But I suppose even from the beginning, that first game at Tottenham, everybody was infatuated with the high press, the energy with which Liverpool played, and of course, early results at Stamford Bridge, and certainly that 4-1 win at the Etihad as well, really, I suppose, got the appetite whetted for what was to come even further down the line under Klopp.
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, started as he meant to go on, really, and straight away you saw all his philosophy implemented. I always remember that first Spurs game. It felt like they were just running around like madmen, and they were just trying to kind of do it all at once. But yeah, it soon settled into a rhythm. I think just going back to what he was like at the outset, you can maybe draw a slight parallel with Benitez in the sense of someone who was proven as a league winner in one of the top European leagues, and someone who obviously could cut it in European competition. But I think the thing that really stood out to me was the contrast to Rodgers, really, in terms of his arrival. And it's not to denigrate Rodgers too much, but like Joe alluded to, he kind of had to talk his way into the stature of the role, and almost felt like a bit of a salesman at times in terms of how he just had to pitch himself to the fan base, or how he felt he had to do so. And maybe he went a little bit too far in terms of trying to tap into the history of the club. Whereas Klopp, I just think he set himself apart from that from day one, really. And as you say, with all those games straight away, it looked like he was just trying to write the first chapter of his own Liverpool story. And I think it took a bit of confidence to come in and do that, really. It was quite bold, and given his standing in the game and the fact that, as the guys have said, Liverpool had to pursue him and convince him to cut that sabbatical short and jump in with the Reds quite soon after leaving Dortmund. It gave him the extra bit of confidence to do that. And I always think he was quite bold when he first arrived in terms of just his cultural transformation of the club and the kind of psychology of what he wanted to imprint on the place and make that connection live again between fans and the other strands of the club. Because that doubt is the believers line, obviously, which was the famous one from his first press conference. I think it's what almost gets lost in that is that he is saying that there were doubters. He's almost being slightly critical of the fans and the malaise that the club maybe had fallen into a bit as the Hicks and Gillette memories kind of began to fade and all that type of thing. So yeah, I just think the way he kind of swaggered into the club and some of the things he did in his first few months really, really set an impression. And those games certainly helped as well at the start.
Yeah, in that first sort of just over half a season, Gorst reaches 2 cup finals, the League Cup final, the Europa League final. He beats Man City home and away in the league, a 4-0 win over Everton in the derby. It was sort of setting out the intention right from the off.
Yeah, I think the first kind of game that made you sit up and take note that his messages and his ideas were starting to come across was against Chelsea. I think might have been the 31st of October. I think they went to Chelsea, went a goal behind early on and ended up winning 3-1. Coutinho had a great game. Lallana played well. I think Benteke, I think he had a good game. And just started to get the feeling that something was stirring. And then that game at the Etihad when Liverpool absolutely hammered City out of sight, and some of the football they played that day. And it was an interesting one because he was starting to rely a lot less on Daniel Sturridge, who many people still pegged as one of Liverpool's best players at the time. He moved Firmino into that false nine role that it was at the time, and started to kind of transform the team. And then they were, could have easily went their way in the League Cup final. Klopp could have been celebrating a trophy within 6 months of his arrival at Liverpool, and then had things gone differently in Basel, he could have easily have got into the Champions League a lot sooner than anticipated. So there were very kind of early shoots of progress and things to kind of look at and think something's happening here with this Liverpool team, and they can go somewhere. And then I think once he got a first transfer under his belt and then cracked on from there, that's when the project really started to gather pace.
For those listening to the podcast, they won't get this, but Sean, that wasn't wine, was it? That was just cordial.
Looks like a glass of rosé, didn't it?
Just a bit of cordial. Yeah, here we go. Just saying cheers to Jurgen. Cherries and berries from Asda, that is, really Asda fans.
Blood Red does Desperate Housewives.
Yeah, brilliant.
Show me this glass of rosé.
Talking of reasons then to put a toast to Jurgen Klopp, let's talk of some of those memorable matches. And Joe, even from sort of in that first season, Gorsty speaking about the Chelsea game, the Man City game, there was that crazy 5-4 away at Norwich. But even obviously more recently, the European nights against Dortmund in the run to the final, obviously in Basel against Sevilla. And of course, we can't not talk about the 4-0 over Barcelona en route to winning the Champions League. The amount of matches that are so memorable just sort of roll off the tongue. Yeah,
especially early on, it always felt like Klopp would have a big result like the Chelsea or the Man City game that you've mentioned, or Dortmund, and then that would be balanced out with a pretty poor defeat. So the defeats at Crystal Palace, games like that sort of brought you back down to earth, and it showed Liverpool's teething problems as they tried to get to grips with Klopp's style. And as Gorsty said earlier, quite often they would, you think that they had players that Christian Benteke, who didn't do badly in Klopp's first season. I don't think people should forget that. He scored a few goals, conducted himself well, but just didn't fit into the style of football whatsoever, really. And Daniel Sturridge was the same to an extent, although he stuck around a while longer. But he started a lot of games that year, but just even in the Europa League final, but it didn't really feel like he fit into the style of football that Klopp wants to play. So it took him a while to get to grips with things. But when it all comes together, Klopp's teams just they can blow teams away, and I think that's why we've had so many, memorable occasions with him, because, it depends. It doesn't matter who the opposition is when Liverpool come up against them. There's so many teams that can't live with Liverpool's style and Klopp's style. So it's made for many memorable occasions. And, just before we move on, I was at that European final in Basel, and, it was really, really disappointing. Looking back now, I was devastated to lose that. It felt like Liverpool were in so much control at half time, and then it all fell away in the second half. And Liverpool got a little bit of a lesson on how far they needed to come. But I wonder now, looking back, whether it was almost a good thing for Liverpool, because the next season they obviously did well, got into the top four and qualified for the Champions League. And, maybe it would have accelerated the progress, but maybe it would have been difficult for Liverpool to cope to be in the Champions League the following season. They weren't quite there under Klopp yet. So, perhaps it was almost a blessing that they lost that game, because it gave them more time to develop, gave him more time on the training pitch to get his team playing. So, might look back at that and think, it was a blessing in disguise.
Yeah, we'll get into the signings as well shortly as well. But Gorsty, come to you first on sort of that Europa League final, and actually on Joe's point of whether it may have been a blessing, because Jurgen Klopp was loyal to the group of players that he inherited when he came in. That 1st January, Steven Kulka aside, and I think obviously Marko Grujic, who didn't really feature, and Kamil Grabara were the only players to come in. If Liverpool had maybe won that Europa League final, maybe would have felt the need to be maybe more loyal to those players who'd got Liverpool back in the Champions League.
Yeah, quite possibly. But I think his mind was made up in certain areas. I think he knew he wanted more pace in his attack, which is why Sadio Mane was targeted. And I think Liverpool, if they'd obviously got back into the Champions League, they would have known a lot more about the budgets, and they might have even been able to kind of speed up that process, because had they got into the Champions League, then who knows, maybe a Mohamed Salah would have arrived 12 months earlier than he did. But I think I do think that result was massive at the time in terms of setting Liverpool back a year, because on the basis of one game, Liverpool could have been back in the Champions League and celebrating everything that comes along with that from a sportive point of view, from a club point of view, and that would have really put them on the path a lot quicker. As it turned out, it meant that Liverpool wouldn't have European football for the following season, which in a way did help them get back into the Champions League, because Liverpool's record that season against their fellow top six rivals the following season, it was fantastic. And they ended up getting in there on the final day of the season, as we remember, against Middlesbrough. And it was almost like possibly a bit of a sliding doors moment, but I don't think, looking back now, anyone would kind of have wished it to have gone any differently, because that kind of set up the march for Kiev from there on in, and that was kind of the building bricks for everything that we see today, I think.
Yeah, it really does feel, looking back at it, that really was sort of the moment, Sean, when everything began to click into gear. And I suppose for Jurgen Klopp, maybe a wake-up call in many ways as to what he'd actually inherited. Liverpool at the time, a football club who weren't getting Champions League football too regularly, and this was a guy who, 3 years before this, had taken Munich to Dortmund to a Champions League final against Bayern Munich at Wembley. There was an awful long way for him still to go.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think the points that everyone's made are spot on. He's someone who is able to draw lessons from defeats as much as victories. Really, that Basel is an obvious one. Kiev's a massive one as well. I mean, reading Andy Robertson's book at the moment, and it really shines through in that, and from what players have said since then, and what Klopp and staff have said, how much they made that a motivation to not repeat that again. And just go back to some of the earlier games while we're still on this point. I think like that Palace game in the November, was it, of his first season, when Liverpool lost 2-1 and people were streaming out of Anfield on 82 minutes. He came out after that and made that quite pointed comment about, "I never felt so alone," which obviously words quite loaded with meaning, knowing Liverpool's anthem, "You never walk alone." And again, it showed that he had the gravitas to kind of criticise behaviour around the club and supporters and learn a lesson from it. So yeah, I think all of those have contributed to the kind of journey that he's taken Liverpool on in these 5 years.
Yeah, it has been a brilliant journey as well. And of course, I suppose, Joe, worth mentioning the 2-2 with West Brom and the final whistle then.
Yeah, it's the moment that people often throw at Liverpool and laugh at them, but I think anyone outside the club perhaps doesn't quite understand the meaning of that, because it did connect directly with what Sean was saying there. And, he talked about feeling alone at that Crystal Palace game when they were 2-1 down, and Liverpool 2-1 down to West Brom, and ended up pulling a late one back. I think Origi's shot was deflected and drew the game 2-2. And it was just Klopp showing the players and showing the supporters that that's what we can do. Games aren't over until we say they're over, and that's something he said a lot. So, opposition fans often try and laugh at Liverpool for that, but they just don't get it. It wasn't Liverpool celebrating a point against West Brom. It was Klopp celebrating and showing the fans, "We need you." And other clubs might laugh, but look at what the fans have done since then. Would Barcelona have been possible without the fans? Would Dortmund have been possible? Would Man City have been possible? Would winning the trophies that Liverpool have won, would any of them been possible without the fans? I really doubt it. And we're seeing this season, they're going to have to try and do it without them, and Liverpool will lose that extra edge. So I think that was an important moment, and I think it was just Klopp underlining a key part of his philosophy, and he's bought in and he's used the fans as an extra weapon, if you like, at Liverpool, which is something I think Brendan Rodgers just couldn't quite do. And as we talked about earlier, because of that perhaps complex of always trying to prove himself, Rodgers couldn't do it, whereas Klopp was confident enough in himself to early on call the fans out, like Sean said, and look what happened. So I think it was a seminal moment in his reign, that West Brom game.
Yeah, certainly. But when he reached that first summer, Gorstein dips into the transfer market for the first time. Of course, we're always quick to laud Michael Edwards and that transfer committee, as you mentioned before, that now isn't sort of derided yet so richly praised. But that first summer, he brings in Sadio Mane, Joel Matip, and Jorginho Wijnaldum. Not maybe the three biggest names that everybody at the time thought these aren't going to be the guys to take Liverpool right to the top. But it's been the way it's played out.
Yeah, well, as you say, it's not been an overnight success, as it were. They've come in, Klopp's come in, and FSG have backed them with kind of war chest that other clubs might get. It's very much been slow and steady over the last 5 years, and that was kind of the initial building block of it, wasn't it? When you think of how important those three players are now to the squad, Mane and Wijnaldum in particular start pretty much every game, don't they? And Mane now for me is one of the absolute best in the world. Matip kind of came in on the back of Klopp's knowledge of the Bundesliga. He was able to find out that he was available on a free, and the club trusted his judgment to bring in a centre back on a free transfer. And Mane, through his kind of success at Liverpool, was seen as someone who could move to that next level at Liverpool, and he's done that tenfold. You'd suggest, as Wijnaldum, who was a little bit more of a box-to-box midfield, a little bit more of a goal-getter at Newcastle, but he's kind of refined his role superbly at Liverpool, and again, he's another important cog in the playing staff. So that summer of 2016, as much as you look at the likes of Alisson and Van Dijk and Salah coming in across certain years, that summer of 2016 was massive when you look back at kind of what Liverpool have achieved over the last few years. I mean, obviously, Karius was not someone who's worked out, but he came in for pretty small fee, really, and he's obviously moved on loan, and that one hasn't worked out. But the other three have kind of become huge parts of what Liverpool have achieved over the last few years.
Yeah, certainly. Even Ragnar Klavan, he was part of the recruitment drive that summer, and Alex Manninger also the other player brought in. But Sean, I suppose one of the impressive things certainly about that summer 2016 recruitment drive from Jurgen Klopp is how the likes of Mane, Wijnaldum and Matip have all been trained on so successfully by Jurgen Klopp, and the fact that they weren't the finishing blocks of the Van Dijks, the Alissons and Fabinhos who came later on in the piece, but they're players who were right and ready for Liverpool at that time, and even now have been able to continue to grow with the club.
Completely, yeah, and I think Mane, almost more than anyone, embodies that. One of the first important signings, as we said, and I think he's adapted and grown throughout the whole Klopp journey, just as the rest of the club has. Obviously started out on one wing, switched to the other. We predominantly see him on the left now, don't we? He's played through the middle when required, but look at him now. I mean, he started the season in fine form, just as he did last season. I think, he arguably, it's not an individual thing, is he? But some of his contributions early on put Liverpool in such a prime position to go on and win that league. And obviously it was very unfortunate what happened against Villa this week, but he was missing, and he's such a key cog to the team. I think you saw against Arsenal just how complete a player he is now, how he was kind of leading the press. He was so intense and energetic up front, and obviously so threatening at the other end, as Chelsea have found out to their cost this season, and no doubt plenty more will. But yeah, and with regards to your point about training on, I think as well, it's remarkable really when I was just before we came onto the pod, just thinking about, players who are in the squad now, and there's actually quite a few, isn't there, who were there before he came. But Milner, obviously a great player, but I certainly didn't think he'd be adaptable or have the kind of longevity he's shown with more than 5 years at the club now, and still an absolute key player. Played the season at fullback, didn't he? Firmino, obviously, what wasn't a Klopp signing. There was a bit of a crazy situation around his arrival at the club and who wanted him and how he'd fit in. But it's gone from being potentially a misfit to the linchpin of the attack. Gomez as well. He was there before, wasn't he? But I think Henderson again is, if Mane maybe sums up the Klopp era, I think Henderson is someone who's the kind of arc of his Liverpool career really defines probably the last decade, really, doesn't it? And it's just so good to see, Klopp and him and everyone else at the club doing what they're doing now. He's gone from being a man who potentially could have been remembered as, rightly or wrongly, perhaps unfairly, as someone who would always be in Steven Gerrard's shadow, to a leader who's worked with his manager to get the club back to the pinnacle of world football. So, yeah, just everywhere you look in the squad, there's someone who has been a great piece of recruitment or a great bit of training ground development, if you like. Like Gorst said before, maybe you can look at Karius as one who hasn't worked, but there's been so many hits and so few misses.
Yeah, and looking through the list of it as well, Joey, rarely recruits sort of midway through the season. The likes of Minamino, Van Dijk, and of course Stephen Kulka aside, it's by and large been the summer recruitment really from Jurgen Klopp of, I suppose, bringing the right players in at the right time. Whilst the recruitment team have done a brilliant job as a manager, as a coach, he's pieced them into the team at the right time.
Absolutely, and of the three that you mentioned, Kolka was an emergency loan. Van Dijk, I think, by all intents and purposes, what they wanted to do the summer before. Everyone remembers what happened there. And Minamino was very much a signing of Liverpool taking advantage of a clause. So, even those players, I would argue, perhaps weren't planned by Liverpool to be signed in the January. So, yeah, he does. I think it was something he said a while back. It might have even said it at Dortmund. He said that he likes to make a commitment to a group of players at the start of a season, that he will work with them throughout the season. And I think all those sorts of things buy into what he does. And, a player knows that if I'm starting the season in the squad, then I'm going to get game time. I'm going to get a chance to come through any bad form. And it works. So, it's been very interesting how they've slowly planned and added different players along the way. Mane and Wijnaldum were signings that helped transform the team early doors. And then each summer, they've just put little pieces together. And then along the way, they've also signed people like Oxlade-Chamberlain, who's up on the screen there. But, you think about people like him who were, Liverpool taking advantage of situations. So they're not afraid to make a signing out the box if they feel like it complements the squad. So it's interesting now. Now I think it's just about keeping Liverpool there. I think they've bought those big players, and now it's just finding extra players to supplement the squad. But each summer you've seen the progress Liverpool make. You've seen what people give to the style. I think Liverpool's transfer policy is, again, we talk about the envy of all the other clubs, but I think it is because I think it's so cerebral, it's so thought out. Every summer, they've planned ahead to know what they need, and they tend to get what they want. And it's come together magnificently, hasn't it?
Gorsty, when we just see the list of the names that Jurgen Klopp has brought to the club, it's absolutely remarkable when you think about it. The amount of players that it hasn't worked out for. Transfers can often be sort of 50-50 hits, whether they're going to work or not. And we know that the recruitment team does such a good job. But Jurgen Klopp is central to that. And so many of those have been great, big, massive hits, not just players who've sort of fixed and made done for Liverpool.
Yeah, well, if you look at the team that started the Champions League final in 2019, you've got Trent Alexander-Arnold, who's obviously an academy graduate, but has no doubt flourished under Klopp. It's pretty much all his team, isn't it? Obviously, Henderson was already there. Milner come off the bench, but generally, all of those players were signed off by Klopp. It's just remarkable the success rate. I remember Jamie Carragher said to me quite recently that he was told by a manager, if you get 50% of your signings right, then you've done a good job. And I think if you went through that list there that was just on the screen, you're looking at easily 75-80% of them who you would consider a success. I mean, I can't think of anyone other than Karius who hasn't worked out. I think the jury is probably still out on Naby Keita, but there's still, he's still an important part of this Liverpool team and what they're going to be doing going forward. And then the rest are all, Dominic Solanke there was sold at a massive profit. Ragnar Klavan was solid, dependable, cut price defender. And then you got the likes of Stephen Corker was an interesting one, but he, what did he do? Play 3 games, I think. You look at the team now: Fabinho, Van Dijk, Thiago. He's going to be another one who you'd expect to be a massive success. Salah, obviously, Mane, who we've discussed, Wijnaldum, who we've talked about, Alisson, Robertson. They're all huge parts of this Liverpool team. The Premier League champions, were European champions up until August. It's just been an incredible run in the transfer market, and obviously that's not all down to Klopp, but him working alongside the recruitment team. Michael Edwards, Barry Hunter, Dave Fallows, and obviously the research department as well, who don't really get talked about too much, but are exhaustive in their kind of use of analytics and the numbers behind everything, just to make sure that there are no misses in the transfer market. And more often than not, Liverpool have got it right the last 4 years.
Let's then quickly go around and say, whether it be for quality, for price, for longevity, who the best signing for each of you is during the Jurgen Klopp era at Liverpool. And Sean, I'll come to you first. You can have first dibs on this one. Who for you is the best of the signings?
It's difficult, isn't it? I mean, you could say Salah. No one hit the ground running like he did. I think Van Dijk or Alisson, you could say maybe the truly transformative one that took them to the top level. But as I kind of said before, I think it's got to be Mane, really, because just he was the first significant outlay, and even a fair bit of money was spent on him, but even some question marks around him then, given where he came from, albeit he'd done quite well at Southampton. There was some suggestions of whether he was good enough to step up at Liverpool and kind of build a side around, but that's exactly what's happened. I think he's pretty much developed as a player, not only in his kind of ability, but in his output season after season. And yeah, I just think that the world's his oyster, really. And it's a privilege to see a lot of them play, but it's been a privilege to see him develop and become the player he is. So yeah, he gets the nod for me.
Joe, who is it for you?
Flip for you, Joe.
We're both trying to be polite there and not speak over each other. But I honestly think this is the most difficult question, and I've probably been asked it in about 20 different pods. And if someone went back and checked my answers, it probably changes every time. So, Mane, unbelievable, isn't he? The way he's got better each year. And as Sean says, I remember at the time there was a clamour. Everyone wanted Mario Götze, didn't they? So I remember at the time when he turned Liverpool down, they went for Mane. There was a lot of, I think if you looked at Twitter now, there'd be a lot of Mickey taken out of Liverpool for paying 30 million for Mane. But I don't think those people take the Mickey anymore. But for me, it's got to be Van Dijk. I think when you think about the signs that they've made, and like, I know obviously Salah hit the ground running in unbelievable fashion, but it felt like Van Dijk immediately took the team to a different level, and Liverpool went from being top four contenders and a team that could put a little run together to a team that were consistent and a team that were a Champions League and a league contender almost overnight the second he came in. So, and you think about what surrounded that transfer, the fact that Liverpool almost messed it all up the summer before. They were competing for him against pretty much every top club in England and probably some abroad as well. That they convinced him to come to Liverpool at a time when Liverpool weren't at the very top. And that they paid a fee, which was, when they paid that fee, it shocked us all, didn't it, really? 75 million for a defender had been unheard of. So, it was a risk, wasn't it? So, and they also waited 6 months at a time when they had a lot of defensive issues. They had some big defeats at City and at Tottenham, and got a lot of stick for it. And Klopp was faced a lot of criticism for not buying a defender, but he waited it out. He got Van Dijk, and he's made a world of difference. So I think I'm going to go for Van Dijk, Guy.
I mean, I could have easily have gone with those two that you've chosen. I could easily go with Alisson as well, who is the best goalkeeper I've ever seen at Liverpool. Liverpool were Champions League finalists in 2018, and they were let down by the goalkeeper. A year later, they were European champions because of the goalkeeper. So could easily go for him, but I'm going to go with Salah. I just think he's just a superstar. Liverpool don't really have superstars in terms of profiles off the pitch. It's more about what they can do on it, and they've kind of achieved that level because of what they've done on the pitch. But I just think he kind of transcends all of that off the pitch, and he's just an absolute, world beater on 44 goals in his first season, 27 in his second, and what was it last season, 23, 24. Again, he's up to 5 already this season. He's going to be Liverpool's top goal scorer again, probably. I think only Sadio Mane will rival him. He's just world class. But how fortunate are we that we can sit here and we could probably pick out another 2 or 3 and still not come to a kind of collective agreement, because there's so many to choose from. So it really is a privilege to kind of watch this Liverpool team at the moment.
And then talking of, and I suppose it's quite poignant really, that Liverpool, as we go into this international break, have lost 7-2 to Aston Villa, a heavy defeat that really, it is a number of those heavy defeats, Gorsty, that early on in Klopp's reign, maybe if you say from that Tottenham game prior to it, that it's maybe a reign of two halves, might be too simplistic to put it that way. But the first couple of years under Jurgen Klopp, it was fast, frenetic football that Liverpool could dish out some hidings to teams, but also they were sometimes on the end of them. And then, since the arrival of Virgil van Dijk, Alisson Becker and the like, that now Liverpool have gone on and just sort of swept up all of the trophies that they possibly could have done.
Yeah, I think the game that kind of sums that up was at Sevilla away in the Champions League when Liverpool were 3-0 up at half-time and drew the game 3-3. That just wouldn't happen anymore, would it? And you look back at the 4-1 defeat against Tottenham in October 2017, was it? That was kind of a little bit of a watershed. And I think probably the efforts were stepped up significantly to try and bring Van Dijk in the January after that one. But there's no doubt that that was a weakness for Liverpool at times. If they didn't put together 15, 20 minutes of attacking brilliance and blow the team they were playing away and seal the results, that they were always susceptible to not winning. But I don't think that doesn't happen anymore, does it? Sunday was an absolute aberration and embarrassment, and we've spoken about that at length on Monday's pod. But I just think now Liverpool are very sure-footed. You look at last season, there was a very obvious change in style where Liverpool didn't go out to hammer teams out of sight. They kind of got 1-0 up or 2-0 up and managed the game from there and won by 1 goal on 14 and 15 different occasions. That is very much kind of a style that they're able to do because of the back line when it kind of, it's all in sync and it's kind of, in tune that it does work, and Liverpool are able to do that. Whereas once they definitely weren't.
Yeah, for me, I suppose what sums up the feeling, Joe, is that sort of ever since that in sort of the last 3 years since Liverpool have got everything in sort of formation defensively as well and have gone on and swept up these trophies, reached 2 Champions League finals. Growing up, watching the Premier League and seeing, unfortunately, Manchester United being the dominant side, did you ever feel that this was possible? And now Jurgen Klopp has got Liverpool right to the very top. They are the team to be shot at.
Yeah, I must admit, growing up and watching Man United dominate for much of the time, and then when Man United, obviously, you very well know, Guy, that Arsenal had a couple of goes, but it never felt like Arsenal could sustain it, whereas Man United was always sustained. You always felt like even if they got knocked off the top for a season, they would come back, and then the only teams that seem to be able to break that up were teams that spent millions upon millions of pounds, like Chelsea and Man City. So it did come to a time when you start thinking, are we cursed? Are we just never going to be able to win this league title? And look, Liverpool fans haven't had a bad time of things. There's been Champions League, there's been FA Cups, there's been League Cups. So, not grumbling on that respect. But, to go and win the league, I thought was so difficult because of the expectation, because of the pressure at Liverpool, because of the time they hadn't won it. So for Klopp to do that, I think, and do that in the fashion that he did, the amount of points that they managed to get last season, on top of the fact that they fell short in the most heartbreaking fashion last year, is just phenomenal. And now I think the challenge is to do what Man United did and dominate. And if you fall short for a season, it doesn't make a difference. You still go out the next season and be top contenders again. So, Liverpool's challenge now is to make sure this isn't a flash in the pan. It doesn't look like it's going to be. It looks like they are going to be a top team. Obviously, the Aston Villa defeat has put a strange complexion on Liverpool of late, because you still want to talk about how good they are, but that's in the back of your mind thinking, how the hell did that happen? But look, it did, and I think Liverpool will get over it, and I still think they'll be top contenders. But yeah, I think I'd like to see them go out and dominate and just always be in the hunt for trophies. And even if you finish second, try and get a League Cup in the cabinet, an FA Cup in the cabinet, compete for the Champions League. And that's what Man United did for so long. That's what Liverpool did for so long before that. And if Liverpool can stay in there, then it would be magnificent.
That's the thing, isn't it, Sean, is that Jurgen Klopp's brought the good times back. So often we hear from yesteryear of in the 70s and 80s, Liverpool swept up. Oh, that was a brilliant time to support Liverpool. There's a feeling now, having ended that 30-year wait, and what a way Liverpool did it, that this could be the start of something.
Absolutely, yeah. I think, obviously, in the 90s, you're absolutely right. The story of the Premier League was United's dominance. But I do think Liverpool kind of kept their hand in a little bit, if you like, and compared to a lot of other clubs, they still had a good time of it. Some great times in Europe under Houllier and Benitez, and I think there's almost a bit of a lineage there. I think without their achievements, you wouldn't have seen Klopp rocking up at Liverpool. Without the kind of modern footnotes in Liverpool's history that have kept them alive as a kind of a club who still have this value to them and this kind of aura about them, like you say, which does obviously derive from decades past. But yeah, I think Klopp he's brought that back, and I think the way it really manifests itself is that Liverpool are a destination club once again, perhaps more than they've almost ever been in their history. And like Thiago, getting him in this summer obviously kind of puts the full stop on that and confirms it. You know, he's an elite player who the European champions wanted to keep hold of, and Liverpool took. But I think that's borne out as well in the fact that players haven't wanted to leave in recent seasons. You know, when we were talking about all those signings before, I think there was a point a couple of seasons ago before all the success really started to roll in where I thought there's no way that Liverpool get all the best years of all of those great players. But that's essentially what's already happened. You know, the challenge for Klopp now, I think, to get this dominance that the lads have talked about is to build the kind of second iteration of his Liverpool team. And I always thought he'd be replacing, you know, let's say Mane and Salah because they've been bought by Madrid or Barcelona. But realistically, he's going to be replacing them because they're getting on a bit, and you know, there's younger players with a kind of bigger ceiling who Liverpool need to recruit. So yeah, I think he's just completely changed the picture of what Liverpool are and what they can achieve, and there's plenty more to come, hopefully.
Yeah, I can't wait to see the player with the bigger ceiling than Mohamed Salah rocking up at Anfield. That is something to get very excited about. Before we go, though, let's talk about the achievements and just how great they are, and whether it be individual matches, Barcelona, the Champions League after coming back and winning that, or Gorsty, the Premier League. This is the man who ended the wait. He goes down in Liverpool folklore forevermore, no matter what comes next for Jurgen Klopp.
Oh, no question. He's up there with, well, he's the best Liverpool manager of the 21st century, and I know a lot of fans have a certain soft spot for Rafa Benitez and maybe to a lesser extent Gerard Houllier, but this is a man who's absolutely transformed Liverpool and got them to a level that they haven't been at since the 80s. Liverpool are back there now, and I'm obviously not old enough to remember some of those great sides, but I think if you ask those who do, they might suggest that this team is the best of the lot, and that is some claim, some accolade, and it'd be a healthy debate, wouldn't it? Either way, because you know, of all Liverpool's all-conquering teams, if they were better than this one, then you know they deserved every success that they had. So you can't really overstate the job that he's done, really, because Liverpool were 10th when he come in the club on the knees in terms of confidence. As we say, they were a bit of a mess off the pitch as well, and really it's just an incredible, remarkable job that this football manager has done, and he's had massive help along the way, and he's the first to say that, but he's had the foresight to kind of surround themselves with people who are experts in the field, and they've got the best people in the big roles.
Yeah, certainly. Joe, he's brought the best players to the club. He's brought the best style of football. He's brought the best and the biggest trophies in the game to Anfield as well. And that night against Barcelona, does that sum it all up? Is that Anfield's greatest night that this man brought?
Yeah, I think it is. I don't think you can argue with that now. It was the most, to me, it's the most unbelievable football comeback over two legs in European history. I think if you take into account the magnitude of Liverpool's opponents and you know the defeat that they'd taken a week earlier, albeit playing very well, I just don't think you can argue that it was such an amazing night, and it sort of summed up everything what Klopp's team can be about. You know, the dominance at times, the genius of the corner, the determination, players coming off the bench to play their role, in like Wijnaldum. And then obviously, if you remember, Liverpool were without most of their top stars. The fact that Liverpool as a squad made it through that game, I think it just sums up everything that Klopp is about at Liverpool. Everyone at the club pulled in the same direction to make sure that they achieve, and that's what they did. But there's been some magical moments along the way. I think there are moments that are easy to forget, that were just amazing at the time. I always remember Coutinho at Old Trafford in the second leg of European tie there, when United looked like they were trying to mount a comeback. Coutinho killing them off, and it was a brilliant goal. And obviously Lallana at Norwich early doors, that was great. Lovren against Dortmund, and then further down the line, some of the goals in the Champions League. Salah at Man City, the Oxlade-Chamberlain against Man City in the first leg, Salah against Roma. I mean, there's just so many. There are so many moments that are easy to forget, and I think that says so much about how far Klopp's taken this team, is that he's given us so many great memories already, and it feels like there's going to be more to come. The only big shame now is I'd love to see fans back in the crowd to enjoy these memories properly, because the biggest and best memory of all, winning the Premier League, we all have to watch from home. So I hope they can win another one in front of fans, because that would just really, Klopp would deserve that. I think the club deserves that, and that's the biggest regret, I think, from Klopp's reign so far, is of that moment without fans. So hopefully one day they can do that.
And that seems to be a central point, Sean, as well, is the role that the supporters have played after Barcelona. Klopp, of course, acknowledged them. You said before, obviously, early doors, that defeat to Crystal Palace, he wasn't scared to call them out. The fans have been as much a part of this journey as the players and the transfers and the coaching staff and everything that we've mentioned. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think there's another side to that coin in terms of Klopp's alignment with the fan base as well. Obviously, we've referred to examples where he's kind of tried to teach them a little lesson and direct them in certain ways that he think would be helpful to him and to the football club, and and that's worked. But I just think some of the things he's done, statements he's made kind of politically, and when he's given his views on Brexit, when he obviously stuck it to the Sun newspaper at that time and the press conference, I just think on a very human level, he's connected with the fan base, not just as a leader of the football club, but as a person, and his morals, his politics, it all ties in. The thing that I always think back on in terms of like moments is that crazy little scene after Kiev where he was, had a few scoops with his mates with his German punk band pals after obviously it hadn't gone well. He sang his little song, and I don't know, it just spoke to me a little bit, that because obviously he's a very serious and ruthless man as a football man, but then as well he's got this human side to him. And like when he first came, he was pictured having a pint of the ciggy on Harbin Street when he was kind of settling into Liverpool and Liverpool life. So yeah, I just think the guys have said it, but you'll be hard pressed to find a better football manager in the world, and you'd be hard pressed to find a better man to kind of sync with this city and what the club's all about.
Yes, certainly. Well, that rounds us off for this celebratory anniversary edition of Jurgen Klopp. 5 years of Jurgen. Let's hope for 5 more, and maybe even more on top of that. Plenty of content across the Liverpool Echo. Do go over and check it all out, as well as our content here on the Blood Red channel. But from myself, Guy Clarke, Sean Bradbury, Joe Rimmer, and our Liverpool correspondent, Paul Gorst, thanks for joining us here on Blood Red. It's bye for now.